everybody. I'm Benjamin Wirtz, and I would like to announce a special guest today in our web interview. On behalf of the Slovenian Ballet Artists Association, we are delighted and honored to have such a notable and outstanding figure in ballet world and author of two very important books. This is Jennifer Homans, an American dance scholar and writer, New York's dance critic. She is the author of the seminal book, Apollo's Angels, a comprehensive study of history of ballet. The book was published in 2010 and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Her second book, about which we are going to talk about more today, is a comprehensive biography of choreographic icon of the 20th century, one of the most important and significant ballet figures probably of all time, Georgeu Balanchinu. The book titled Mr.B, Georgeu Balanchinu's 20th Century was published last year and has already drawn attention worldwide and won critical acclaim, and was often described as an astounding work of scholarship. With this, I would like to hand over the floor to our host of this talk, Mrs. Tatiana Ajman.
Good morning, Jennifer. We are really, truly honored to have you in this circle of friends and colleagues from the ballet world and around. Lovers of ballet, lovers of Balanchinu, lovers of good letters, and fine novels and imagination and the truth, the history and everything. So thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
How are you?
Tatiana, thank you so much for having me.
We tried to talk to you even before the book was published. But we are even happier now when it's out, and for sure you can share later on in this short talk we have today, because time is really precious to you and we all understand. When you have the experience, when the book is out and all the reviews and all the reflection and echo that you already have on your work, but just I'm so curious, when you are like coming from the arts, being on stage and being involved in performing, and then suddenly you do this great career as a historian and writer. This must be amazing.
Well, thank you for saying. It was a bit unexpected for me, in the sense that as you said, I was a performer to begin with, and I was trained at the Balanchine school as well as other places, and I loved to dance and I loved to perform, and it was a world for me that was very much away from words and language and not really part of that. So when I stopped dancing and ended up doing a PhD in modern European history, I thought I would leave dance behind completely, that it would be just a total change, and that those two worlds don't meet. But I couldn't quite let go of it somehow, so I kept on returning to it and thinking, how could I do this? Is there a way I could bring these two things together that is history and not necessarily always criticism? And so I decided I would try, and that was the first book, Apollo's Angels, and then this was a sort of more focused, in-depth. Mr.B, writing about Georgeu Balanchinu was a real deep dive into a person and to a personality, and as even more of a writing project in that sense, just a challenge. Can I understand this person and describe what he did and discover him?
Well, Mr.B is not totally unknown in our country. For instance, in my house where I work, we cooperated with his trust on Serenade, and at that time we for sure got to know the experience from first hand, you know, people coming here to stage the piece. But also what we know about him, we cannot have this kind of relation the same as you have, because you come from the environment where he was active and where he was working, and for sure, you know, there's a legacy of Balanchine in the United States. So how big is this idea of his personality in your country? How can you describe, maybe from your personal experience, what is this phenomenon?
You know, he was really somebody who brought ballet to America in a way that it hadn't existed before. Of course, there was some ballet here before he came in 1933, but not to the level that he developed it. And he really sort of seeded the art form and created a phenomenon which was both you know, a high art and also a popular art. So he managed to sort of reach a lot of people, and his dancers then, you know, as you're saying, they sort of spread out all over the world and all over the country here. Many of them, his former dancers, run companies in the United States and across Europe, Central Europe. You know, his influence goes really all the way into Russia, of course, and into Asia. So he's really became an almost worldwide phenomenon. But of course, the company that he founded was based in New York City, as you're saying, and there was a moment in New York in the post-war period, really, when he was leading the avant-garde in New York, certainly in the dance world. There were others too, of course, Merce Cunningham, Martha Graham, Paul Taylor. There were other big figures, but he was an enormous influence. And I think because it's a simple reason that we all recognize and know that you went to the theater every night and you came out transported. And it was just an extraordinary experience. He was truly a genius, and he saw himself, you know, to your point about your country, very much as a European and as a Central European, even because of his Russian background, his experiences in Germany, and then in France. And the company toured, especially in the early years, very widely. So. Both on its own steam, as it were, but also as a sort of State Department official government effort to encourage cross-cultural exchange.
Someplace you said that your research went on like for 10 years. And I was reading and listening to the talks you've had about the book and your work. What was most impressive was that how you really approached this last book of yours. You really try to do everything to go in deep as much as possible in his work, in his personality, in his life. How hard was this to, I mean, what was the first original idea when you started? What was the first thought you had before you did what you did?
You know, I'm a trained historian, so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to write this book. I think I even was thinking of it as, you know, sort of Georgeu Balanchinu, a history in the beginning. And I was going to try to sort of, it sounds a little cliche almost, you know, I was going to try to place him in his time and to build the history up around him and try to understand where he and where dance fit in the cultural history of the 20th century. And I did try to do that. That never went away. But as you said, it was a long process. I was working on this book and working on it hard, not a little bit every year. I mean, it was my obsession for 10 years. I really thought of nothing and no person more than I thought about Balanchine every day. So it's a strange kind of thing that you have this very close relationship with a dead person who had an enormous effect. You can't really talk to them, but you're trying hard through every possible means, through written sources, through archival sources, through, I did over 200 interviews with dancers and artists and musicians and composers, with anybody who was in his world that I could find, who was still living. And there were many who are still living, because many of them were very young. Even though he died in 1983, there are still many people alive who worked with him. So I was fortunate to be able to talk to people who knew him personally. So, the research became its own just all-consuming project. And I talked to many people for many hours, and I went back to them over and over again, because the idea, how you build trust, and also the slipperiness of memory. So it was important sometimes to talk to people several times, because their accounts, their memories of it would change as I took them back into it, and as they went back into it and took me back into it. So it was a very interesting and complex process that I have to say I was never bored. Balanchine took me down so many interesting paths, both intellectually and emotionally. So the book changed in the sense that it began as very much a history, and I think it ended. And when I wrote it, I was also very, very interested and focused on the man, and how this man made this art, and what his life had been like. And it's a difficult and in some ways sad life, but also an extraordinary one. So how to explain and talk about his inner life and describe in a serious way the dances, which I also spend a lot of time on the work itself. It's not just the history and the man. There's long passages about the dances themselves.
So in a way, you had to live a second life of his.
Exactly. It felt that way. Like I was sort of in a strange world of my own, which is, I think, how it is sometimes when you write a book, or at least it is for me, that there's a kind of other world that you live in. You live in the daily world, you do your things, but the real, and this is a theme in the book even, because this is, I think, what he did with some of his dances, then there's another world that you're also living in. And in his case, it was the world of the stage, and the world of music, and the world of, it's a world that he made, that he created with his dancers. I titled the book Mr.B because that's what the dancers called him. And in some kind of almost mystical way, he doesn't exist without them, because they are you can't do one of his dances without dancers. So it's a simple point, but a profound one, I think.
It's very interesting, as you were saying. Now we have this Mr.B, then we have the circle of people he worked with and lived with. And then we have you. It's kind of a creative process to come in the end to have something written about his life. Do you think, or can you share with us, is it possible to say it, to talk about this? Was there a slice of, a piece of creativity from your side also? What happened if in a moment you didn't have an adequate answer or a detail that you needed in your investigation? How did you jump over this kind of little, you know what I mean?
Of course. No, I mean, when I started, I had a view really that I was going to be, I was trained as a historian. I believe in the possibility of not an absolute truth, but in the possibility of, through serious archival work and documentation, of something that is not fiction, that it's based in the best possible truth we can arrive at, or I can arrive at a time. And I never lost that, but the story itself, to capture it, became very much, as you're saying, a creative project. And even, I begin the book quite conventionally, in a way, with the childhood and the life. It's a chronology. It is the story of a life. But the book begins in Russia in 1904, and in his parents' past and the family past, and these kinds of things. But I decide very early on that it's, as his life goes on, it becomes more and more the inner life and the creative world that is taking over. And the book ends inside of a dance. So that was my way of trying to capture some of where he spent his real time, the time he valued most, the things he believed in, the fourth dimension, as he put it, the world that is occupied by a little bit more, that's a little bit more elevated, that is apart from the ordinary, that is really an extraordinary and fantastical world, not an ordinary and pedestrian world, which is what he was trying to create. So I felt I had an obligation to try to at least meet that in formal terms and in terms of my own writing. And so that was the great and probably the most interesting challenge to me, was how I could write the book, how I could use language to convey some of this ambition that he had, which was something otherworldly, really.
So you had material evidence. I have this information. People were giving you his notes and things that they kept, what they got from him or some other places, also his personal creative notes, and then letters. Did you travel to places where Mr.B was visiting or working, also to feel the atmosphere of the places, even though?
Absolutely did. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're so right. I mean, it was based on, and I'm very, there's 100 pages of footnotes in this book. It's very documented, and I didn't, to even finish your last question, which was so substantial, I didn't really make things up, in the sense of, little facts or things like that. If I didn't know, I said I didn't know. And even if down to sort of what was he wearing, well, that I was trying to take that from sources. I was trying to be as historically sort of, that was my anchor. That's what I was always anchored in, what I could know. And the rest went a little bit further, for sure. But can you say again what you just said? What was the?
I asked you whether, when you had all this material evidence around you, I can imagine how your working place was busy.
Yeah, I know, exactly. And I did go to places, as you were saying. I did go to Russia a couple of times. I was in Georgia. I was in the places that he was in, even though they've, of course, changed dramatically from when he was there to now. But just to see, and some of the buildings are certainly there. And I went and I walked, and I was in Copenhagen, where his fifth wife was in the hospital for polio, and I found the place the hospital where they were, and the places where they had stayed, and it was very useful to do that as a sort of prompt to an imagination of what it must have been like. I mean, it's I think seeing and feeling the place, and also giving yourself the time to sort of be there, to stay there, and let the thoughts come, and the connections between, even when was in Copenhagen, I thought, oh my goodness, look at these canals. They're quite similar to it's quite similar feeling to walking in Petersburg, even though Petersburg is grand and Copenhagen is more sort of a bourgeois city, a smaller kind of experience of that. But there was still something there, and I know, he was listening to Russian radio there. There was all those connections that you could make that I certainly wouldn't have made if I was just sitting at my desk at home. And it was fun.
So yeah, I can imagine. The nice part of the work.
Yeah, it's like being a
Yes.
detective or something, oh, this is the apartment he lived in, let me walk up the stairs and see what it was really interesting to do.
So this part, like material world, is well preserved. What would you say? Like the places you've been and the the spaces here.
Of course, some places more than others, right? I mean, I was in his apartment building in Paris, and I think that's probably was more or less the same. St. Petersburg? No, of course, vastly changed because, the Second World War, the Revolution, all of these things that were the First World War. From his childhood, it was very, very different. But still, the
It's there.
Imperial Palace is there, and you can walk through the big squares and the spaces and feel the vastness of the ambition of Russian culture and of Russian architecture, and it's I think it's important to do. So I was glad that I was able to. I was fortunate.
So in some way, you wanted to know about his work better, to understand him better. But do you now, after all this journey, do you have this experience of knowing him better and understanding, all the influences around him and his life and his energy and his creativity also, do you understand it better? Or
yes, I think I do, because I mean, I understand it better, and of course, because I learned a tremendous amount. I mean, I studied Weimar culture to understand what he would have seen. Interwar culture. I studied the Russian revolutionary influences and who they were and how that, so I think I really did absorb many of his influences, the way, well, not the way he did, but the content is still there, at least in the worlds of painting and sculpture and literature and other musical forms of art. The dance is also still there, but often lost, as dance is. It disappears into thin air. So, those things are even more, you can't anchor quite so easily, but it is an act, as you said, of imagination to pull that back too. And I do try to reconstruct some of the dances that were lost, as not reconstruct, but to say something about how they were, working from notes, working from reviews, working from posters, working from any source I could possibly get, an account of them by somebody who happened to be there, who was a writer who wrote it down. So I really sort of felt I did travel his path, just to even give a concrete example. And at one point I found some choreographic notes that had references to Spinoza and to Goethe and to film and so I had to follow those things, and I followed them as deeply as I could. I really read those writers and tried to understand what he saw in them. So I think I did arrive at a better understanding of the man. But of course, one never captures. It is, as you say. I mean, writing a biography is a strange and hopeless task in a way. You're never going to say what that person's life was, but you I could immerse myself in it and give an approximation that holds some truth for people. But as somebody said to me at the very start, everybody has their Balanchine. And of course, that's true, just as everybody has their mother, and the sister has a different mother, and the brother has a different mother. So there's always going to be a point of view, and I didn't shy away from that.
Yeah, when we are at this point, there's one image he had, a very romantic one, I would say. So if one doesn't know, what was going on behind in his real life, also, you could say, oh, it's really a beautiful picture. It's a beautiful life experience he had, and but on the other hand, there are some things that people were starting to talk or discuss or say about him that were not so nice, and we know all that. So how did you manage the balance between two different worlds he was holding in himself?
I mean, it's just what you said. I mean, there's a kind of they're developed over years, and there's no one cause of this, but he was a great artist, and there developed around him a kind of mythology, and it had to do with his both his way of creating, that it sort of poured out of him, and that it was just like almost from God, it came out of him, that sort of very romantic image of an artist. Then there was the idea, he was married 5 times. He had many loves, and his world was in part made through love and eroticism, and the dances have that in them for sure, in a deep way. There were, strange, almost cultish things about the way he ran the company that had to do with the dancers being devoted to him and not being, just giving everything, almost a monastic requirement. No boyfriends, let's not do this thing, don't get married, please don't have children, don't do those things, because it's going to take you away from what I'm trying to do with you, and what will give you your better self. And don't become a mother and a wife when you can become a dancer. This was his and an artist. This was his sort of message to them, and of course there was a big struggle there, because many of them wanted different things in their lives, and they wanted their own freedom and independence, and he gave it to them on the stage. So the ones that stayed and decided to give their all to as it were, submit to that, were richly rewarded. But it wasn't for everyone, that's for sure. So I tried very hard to, the life has so many aspects, and as you said, we all thought of it as a kind of romantic life, and it wasn't really. It was a very tough life, and he experienced, he almost died many times, several times. He was born in 1904. He lived in the imperial world. He, not from wealthy parents, not from an aristocratic Russian family. It wasn't white Russian in that sense, but he was a student at the imperial school, and then his world is upended by the First World War and the Revolution. He's starving, he's ill, he gets TB. He was weakened, and yet the revolutionary avant-garde culture was also one of his main nourishments. So there's always this tension between the difficulties of his life and the loss. I mean, he was really sort of, his family went to Georgia, he was alone. He left Petersburg in 1924. Well, then Leningrad in 1924, he ends up in Europe. He's still got TB. He's on a magic mountain, like a Thomas Mann magic mountain experience for TB. I mean, he could have died any moment then. So he has a sense, by the time he gets to the US in 1933, he's a pretty battered person. And he's already been married twice, and the third marriage is coming quick. So, he's somebody who never really settles with a single woman, one person. And he was lonely. It was a very lonely life, even though he was surrounded by people. And so he made a theater where he could live. So there's this sense in which, the life is not what it seems from the outside. Inside, there's a lot of struggle going on, and the work doesn't just pour out of him. It's coming from tremendous amount of observation and gathering of imagery and ideas from all of the places that he found himself in, which is why I call it a 20th century life. He really was observing and absorbing so many things, everything from imperial culture, Russian revolutionary culture, surrealism, Dadaism, all of these, abstract expression, all of these things were sort of in him, atonal. That he was experimental. Above all, he was not a classical choreography. He was what he called progressive. He wanted to be progressive and never lose that edge of moving on. He wasn't interested in reproducing, even though there are very classical elements in some of his work. So, and then the work that he did around a score, he studied a musical score. As he said, I didn't listen to music, I read music. And he did read music. He was a highly trained musician, and he had a musical structure, a deep musical analysis before he even went into the studio. So he wasn't just walking in and it pouring out from God. No, he was working very hard. So there are sort of a lot of things that I'm trying to fill in and correct. And the other one that you mentioned is that, he was an extremely humble and civil man, even though he treated people well, and people loved him. He knew everybody in the theater, from the principal dancers and the conductors and the people on the very sort of highest part of the pyramid of the theater, down to the stage hands and the people who painted the sets and the people who did. He valued and knew each one of them. So he was beloved. He was not a kind of Don Juan figure, but he also had these strange ways of trying to control his instruments. And his instruments were people, and above all, women. So, trying to control a human being, as we all know, is very, very, and not only control, but to sort of bring that human being into his creative process so that they could be part of it too. When you're working with, if you think about the dancers as the colors and paints or something like that, in an imperfect analogy, you need to know the psychology, the tones, the physical peculiarities, you need to know everything about your instrument in order for the dance to be interesting and alive. So he was not aiming for some kind of perfect thing that he would control. It was a way of galvanizing these people and bringing them in so that they could all be involved in this creative explosion, which was the dance every night, the live performance every night, which of course he couldn't control, because once the curtain goes up, he's standing in the first wing and they do whatever they want.
So it's really interesting. You were talking about the era of where he was working, and there was really a lot of things going on at that time. It was really very vivid, artistically vivid, avant-garde, beginning of the last century. It was amazing. So we do miss, of course, we all miss this kind of fluidity and this kind of explosions in the fields of art all the time, because we just feel we are in kind of repetition and analyzing what was already done and just remaking it a bit. And people who are creative this way are really so rare to meet. Do you think also our standards now, like now in 2023 or in this decade or in last decade, where we started to talk more about how we take care about the community we work with, community meaning the ensembles or the theaters, how we treat each other, and that we have this, we became more aware how we should be behaving towards each other. This changes our attitude or our understanding of his work and personality, or should we be more humble to the time where he was living and working and understand more and be more have more tempers towards that, because it was just
I mean, I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that, because I don't really have an answer. I felt that my job as a historian, and I'm not trying to just avoid your question, but I really felt that my job was to, in a way, provide just the most amount of information that I could, was to say, this is what I could find out. And for example, the dancers that I spoke to, and especially I spoke to lots of women dancers, so that the issues of women and how he treated women and the idea of the body and what they experienced from him. I don't shy away from the parts of him that could be very cruel and that could be very, these were young women and teenagers a lot of the time, and they were being asked and submitting themselves to a regime that was punishing and could be almost violent to their own bodies. They made the choice to be there. It's a very fine line between what they chose and what they became engrossed in. As we know, at those ages, you're so vulnerable. And so what I tried to do was to present all of that with, in a way, in cold blood. Just like, this is the testimony of these women. This is what happened to them. This is what they say about it. And I didn't feel really that, in contemporary moment, in various ways, there's a lot of judgment and, as you say, a reassessment of how people should treat each other. And so there's a lot of judgment about the past and how people treated each other then. But I just didn't feel that was relevant for what I was doing. I wanted to explain his behavior in terms of his life and his art, not in terms of the present moment, which is, after all, it would be anachronistic kind of thing. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know what it would be like now. If he was living now, he would have lived a different life. We don't know what that would have looked like. Who knows? We're all so engrossed in our own present. We can't separate ourselves from it, I don't think. And he, as he put it, he had his little place, and he made his world around him. And if you wanted to be there with him, great. If you didn't, he would say you could go. It's very complex, because they were very involved and they were very young, the dancers. So I sort of leave it to the audience and the people reading to make what they will of it. I don't think it's a simple case of it shouldn't have been that way. Well, it was that way, and it did produce great art. Well, how to untangle that? It's a very difficult thing. So I tried to lay it out and to explain his behavior in terms of his own life. We all have strange and difficult lives in various ways, some more than others. And he had a very challenging life and a very great life. He did a lot with it. So I'm obviously an admirer of him, but I don't have I don't have a rosy glasses on, I don't think. I see him. And I didn't always
I
like
was,
him, you know.
I was not at all expecting justifying or unjustifying, or accusing or anything. I was just, yeah, you gave us the precise answer to that. It's perfectly okay. It's it's how it should be, because we are not there, and we, as
Exactly. Not there.
exactly as you, as a historian and writer, you choose the way, you choose your approach, and you did, I think, the perfect way for readers to make their own judgment is not the right word, but picture of him, and whether they relate to his work or not, it's still important. It stays there, and after, of course, that much of work you've done, it's important to have these facts, and the historian point of view is also very important. But at the same time, of course, you admire him, because otherwise you wouldn't do this book
Well,
or this
exactly. I mean,
writing.
he was a great artist, and I was
Yes.
fortunate enough to be in the company of that art for several years, and it changed my life. So, you know, people who were there were changed by him in ways that were extraordinary, not ordinary.
What was the most beautiful sentence you found in letters, in the letters you got, or you had the access to see and to read? What was the most beautiful thing you can share with us, for instance?
You know, there were some letters that he wrote. There are many things, but there were some letters that he wrote to his third wife, Vera Zorina, um, an actress and a Broadway star. And it was a very difficult and agonizing relationship, a very sad one. He was quite young. This was when, I mean, quite young, not that young, right? This is in the 30s, so he's in his 30s. And I think he loved her so deeply, and she didn't return his love in the same way. And he wrote her letters. There's a series of correspondence in which he talks about his desire to make eternal dances. And these are passionate letters. It's not the letters of somebody who's cold and using people for art in any way. No, he was seeking a sort of great. He was a great romantic. He believed in love, in an all-consuming love, and he almost believed in it too much. He could stifle a woman, you know, just like suffocate her in his love. And many of his wives said that. And the love was always tied to the art. So he talked in these letters about the difference between spectacular dances, as he put it, and eternal dances. And I think that was one of the moments when I saw that there was this deep connection for him between love, eroticism, dance, a particular woman and who she was and how she moved and how she was as a person. And this idea that he had of making dances that were a kind of, they were sort of, it's like reaching the spirit through the flesh, you know, and it's a paradox in a way. And making something that was, I think he was a very religious man, and he was a mystic in many ways. And he, you know, not only a Russian Orthodox trained, at least raised person, but also a mystical person. And which is why he was interested in Goethe and Spinoza and Quixote and you know, Gogol and all of these writers that are interested in doubling and strange phenomenon and the peculiarities of human nature. So those letters were a revelation to me, because they're written in a very broken English, because that was the only language they had together, and his English was not good, but they really showed the inner man, the passionate side of him at that moment, and the scope of his ambition, which he was well aware of.
So my last question would be, what is, before I pass the word to maybe Natasha or Benjamin, they have a question for you for the end of our talk. So, okay, now all this process from the start, collecting, finding money to do the job, traveling, writing out, putting notes, organizing, having this image, how to do it. So, and then the process of publishing and waiting. The book is out, and I've seen you had the presentations already, and it's around for people to read it and to buy it, to order it, a copy for themselves, to keep it on a shelf next to the beds. What's going on around the book right now? This would be like a fresh news from US.
I mean, the book has been well received. I've been quite gratified. It's been nice to see that. It's been nominated for a couple of prizes. It's doing well, and for an author, at least for me, it's a strange moment in a way. I mean, I've only written one other book, and this one took me, as we've said, many, many years to write. So I was very much alone in all of that process that you just described so well, the long notes and the living day to day alone with this man. And then suddenly there's this public world that's involved in something that was, to me, very private. It was my world. So it's a little strange for me, but I'm quite, I like sharing these things, and I like the book. I mean, I think I can't really tell you in a way. I'm not sure I can answer the question well, because I don't know what other people are really thinking. I read the reviews, of course, because I'm interested to know what people are thinking. And I think, you'd have to talk to other people to know really what it's doing. I can just tell you that formally it's been well received, which has been nice for me. But you know how it is. You spend all your time, and it's my world, my life, my 10 years, and people get the book and read it. It's a long book. I think it will take a while for it to settle, for people to have time to read and to really think about it. But to me, it's great to be able to talk to people about it and to hear their views, and especially to talk to dancers and people who are interested in dance, which was why I was so happy when you invited me to do this, because it's in some way I'm always thinking of them, because that's their heritage and they are involved in it. And even if they're not in the book, they are part of that trajectory in that world. So yeah.
In a way, I feel like, oh my God, it would be so beautiful. Jennifer and Mr.B would share the time of their lives together. So because he would have like a genius muse in his life for the work you've done, and the love and passion that you invested in your work. And for sure, we will try to find a way how to bring the book closer to the dance public as well. And this interview is, of course, also on international channels, so people can hear more if they don't follow US news. So thank you very much from my side. It was very exceptional talk with you. You made my day, and really, thank you so much again. Hope to meet you once in person.
Hope we can do this in person one time. That would be lovely, and to be able
Yes.
to talk further. And I can't thank you enough. It's really, really been terrific to talk with you and to be on your program. So
Always welcome. So I pass the word to Benjamin maybe, or to Natasha. for the end. If there's a question, observation, remark.
Yeah. So maybe I would like to just point a few words. Things that I mentioned when I was asked by Natasha to do a review of your book. I was really and it was a kind of a tight schedule to do it, to tell you the truth, but I somehow must really confess that your writing was extremely, how should I put it, approachable, and I really must commend you on your style and your excellent writing skill to I don't know, to bring together the scholarship and also the novelistic style. I would also say maybe it also reads like a thriller almost, the whole book. Not to mention the all, let's say, very insightful things that we learn when we, let's say, it's a true page turner, this book. So I would really commend you for it. But I wanted to ask you, I don't know, when I was, let's say, listening to podcast, I think it was the Dance Edit podcast. You mentioned something that uh, he was always sort of like, I wouldn't say shying away from the establishment as his school, but you mentioned something like when one has this like sort of establishment, it may also be let's say one might fear that or may lose their artistic vitality, something like that. And it was very insightful in terms that uh, I also couldn't help myself but to draw certain parallels between Balanchine being sort of like Apollo in, leading his muses, like sort of in these dancers, especially women dancers, as you pointed out, not in terms just of controlling their lives, or maybe he was just trying to drawing them with his art through dance to collaborate on, let's say, many exciting journeys that they were on together. And I would maybe ask you if you had let's say, another chance of rewriting the whole thing, or maybe take another, let's say, view on the whole this complex phenomenon known as Georgeu Balanchinu. What would you maybe focus on your next project?
Oh, what a good question. Well, first of all, thank you for saying that the book was talking about the writing a little bit, because that was a very important part for me. And I just, I mean, the more I learned about him, the more I realized this is an epic story. This is just an incredible human story, full of frailty and difficulty and ambition and passion and human foibles and so many.
I think you said somewhere that as if reality and, let's say, an illusion or maybe dreamlike world almost collided. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I really worked hard on the writing. I felt the writing was very important because, as we were talking about earlier, the form of the book would also reflect the life itself, and it was an epic life. So I tried to write it in a way that would capture some of that, and that was one of the things that interested me most about the project. I mean, in terms of what I would do differently now, or if it leads me to another project, I don't know that I would have done any of it differently. I mean, it's already a long book, and it could have been even longer.
Yeah.
But
I think the hardest part was to omit yourself to the structure, probably, that it wouldn't be too long, as you said it, because it would
exactly, it was
almost
sort of a
take
question.
another volume too.
Yeah, it was a process of elimination as much as it was,
Of
the
course, yeah.
question of what to include and what to exclude was really delicate and part of constructing the story. And it is my construction of the story because I have left a lot out. You can never not leave a lot out. As I said, biography is a strange genre. And in a way, I don't even think of this as a biography. I think of it as almost, it was a novelistic
Yeah,
enterprise because there is a story that's a
yeah,
plot,
I would say too. Yeah.
that's quite amazing. And it drove
Well,
itself.
one thing, if I just may add something, I was really amazed by Balanchine's doodling. I mean, the all the
Isn't it
graphic work
incredible?
that he was doing with the drawing, I mean, with pencil, and I think Freud would have a lot to say about these things. But in a way, it was really amazing that you included and managed to find these things and put them in a book. So it's really very
Yeah,
insightful from
no, I mean
this
the
part also.
discovery process of, when somebody hands you a drawing like the one of him with it's a self-portrait of him with his mouth open and he's swallowing human bodies, is just, he had a kind of a wide roaming and expansive imagination. I mean, this was a man of tremendous imagination. So you can see that even, yeah, like you said, you just in a moment in an image like that. So it captures so much.
Just my tiny little question for, let's say, the last one. I was also very intrigued, but by what you said when he thought himself as, let's say, as a progressive choreographer. He didn't like the word neoclassicist or neoclassicism. He once said, I think, or maybe on several occasions, that this is your word, neoclassicism, not his. So, what is, in your opinion, the neo in his work? I mean, it's obviously you wrote a book, let's say more than 600 pages book, but still, to summarize, what do you think his essence would be for, like, I don't know, for the development of the ballet art in the 20th century? Or
I mean, I
maybe
think
even
he's
more,
part of the,
that seems like an inspiration for further
yeah.
development of the art.
Yeah, and he was, and as you said before as well. I mean, he was very, he had great anxiety. He was very nervous about the establishment. And as Lincoln Center was established and he became, the great George Balanchine, this was a moment of some, we think he's so great. How could he ever doubt himself? And I'm not sure that he did doubt himself in a deep way. I think he felt very much that he had a gift from God. And I don't say that just sort of as a cliche. He really did believe that. But he also doubted his own talent. How could he not? And would he keep going? And not everything he did was a success. I mean, he had many failures too. So this is part of it. He always said, don't try to create a masterpiece. Just make work. Just keep going. And I just keep going. I just make dances. I just make dances over and over again. If you want to try to summarize, and I did try to do this a little bit, I think his contribution was to the world of dance, but also even just more generally to the way in which we see the body in the 20th century. And he really decentered, and it's like an atonal body almost. He found a way. He remade dance technique, which was a way of remaking the body. And this is sometimes where you get into a somewhat, it has some violence in it, this process of turning out the feet even more, of exposing the insides of the
Yeah,
body,
the full expressivity of the body.
full
Yeah,
expressivity of the body, the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the whole body working, and the ways in which, even just in a simple question of how do you, what is the center and how do you balance? What are the axes? Because classical ballet begins, of course, with a very constructed axes, a very balanced body up the center of the spine, two symmetrical sides. And he really kind of knocked that off. And there is no center except the center that you constantly find and regain through a physics of the body through energy being pulled against itself in different directions, through speed and movement that never allows you to sit in a central moment and sort of stack your body so that it's perfectly aligned. And this is why perfection was not of interest to him. He didn't believe in the perfect body. He believed only in the moving body, and the body that could reclaim its own center as it moved off center. So it's a kind of you know, in the terms of the 20th century, it's really about taking away the static quality and giving the body a much more extreme range of movement and a much more extreme
And freedom, essentially, also.
freedom.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
aiming for an even greater freedom, that you're going to be able to, if you develop this technique, you'll have so much more capacity to free yourself. So I think that was
That
really
is a lovely thought, yeah. And conclusion.
So it's not a
Thank
full
you.
answer, but it's a partial answer. Yes.
Thank you, Benjamin, also for your very insight questions. It was really nice
A
to
pleasure.
have you to help me to be more knowledgeable. But I'm also grateful
Pleasure,
to
always.
Jennifer. It's nice to meet a writer in person and to know what's behind the writing process and everything. This was really, really nice. So thank you again for your time. Maybe Natasha has unmuted. You want to say something?
Yes, I would like to say just a few words. You know, the questions could go on and on because we opened really a very special field in a dance, but the time is pushing us. So I'm just really grateful for this talk. I got completely absorbed in it, and it enlightened me in many ways. So I'm really happy that we made it. So thank you to everybody, especially to Jennifer for joining us, and to Tatiana and Benjamin for their questions and everything. And see you maybe again.
I hope so. And please, I thank you all for making this happen and for us being here today. It's wonderful to talk with you and with your audiences, which I don't get to talk with so often. So I hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.